What you are about to hear happened on a commercial flight leaving Georgia in March of 2024. An executive woman who believed she controlled everything discovered she controlled nothing. And a flight attendant who lost something sacred mid-flight became a witness to a miracle of the Virgin Mary that would change 2 lives forever. But before we continue, leave a comment telling me where you are watching from and what time it is there right now. I would love to see how far the miracles of the Virgin Mary are reaching. Sarah Bennett was 37 years old and had been working as a flight attendant for 12 years. You know that type of person who always seems okay? Who smiles at work, greets everyone, never complains? Sarah was like that, but inside, she was broken. 3 years earlier, her younger sister had passed away. Rachel was only 28. It happened too fast. One day she was there laughing, making plans. The next day she was gone. Sarah never really processed it, never cried enough, never stopped long enough to truly feel anything. She just kept going, working, smiling, pretending everything was fine. The only thing she carried from her sister was a small Virgin Mary medal. Rachel had worn that medal every day. After she passed, Sarah started wearing it, hidden under her uniform. She didn't even know exactly why she still did it, maybe just out of habit. Maybe it was the only way she could remember without completely falling apart. That Tuesday morning, Sarah woke up at 5 as always, took a shower, put on her immaculate navy blue uniform, looked in the mirror, forced to smile. Another day, she told herself. She didn't know it would be the day that changed everything. Diane Crawford was 48 and vice president of a large pharmaceutical company. You know that type of executive who practically lives in airports, who answers emails at 2 in the morning, who never turns off the phone, who thinks the world should step out of her way. Diane was exactly like that, but in the last 6 months, something had changed. The divorce had been finalized in September. She lost half of everything in the separation. The house she had lived in for 15 years, half of her savings, half of the life she had built. Now she worked 80, 90 hours a week, trying to prove she still had value, trying to show everyone, especially herself, that she didn't need anyone, trying to forget that she went home every night to an empty, silent apartment. The meeting in Chicago was at 2 in the afternoon, a presentation for a client who represented $20 million in contracts. If she lost that account, she would lose her position. And if she lost her position, she would lose the only thing she felt she had left: control. Diane entered the Georgia airport at 10 in the morning, 2 hours early as always. But the check-in line was longer than she expected. The woman in front of her was far too slow arranging her luggage. Everything seemed to be conspiring against her. Have you ever reached that point where even the simplest things feel irritating? Where every sound is too loud, and every person in your way seems to be there on purpose just to slow you down? Diane was far beyond that point. The flight took off right at noon. Sarah was assigned to first class that day. Only 6 passengers. It should have been an easy flight. Sarah walked down the narrow aisle, performing her usual safety checks. Diane was in seat 2A by the window. She already had her laptop open even before the plane began taxiing, trying to review the presentation for the 10th time that morning. The words danced on the screen. She couldn't concentrate. Her head hurt. Her neck was tight, but she had to make it work. She had to be perfect. 20 minutes after takeoff, Sarah walked by offering drinks. "Good morning. May I offer you something?" Diane didn't even lift her eyes from the screen. Coffee, black. Sarah served the coffee. She smiled even without receiving a response. She continued on to the other passengers. 15 minutes later, the call button from seat 2A lit up. Sarah dropped what she was doing and went back. "Can I help you?" Diane pointed at the cup, still half full. "This coffee is cold. I want another one." Sarah prepared a new coffee, brought it back, still hot, almost burning. "Here you go." Diane took it without thanking her. Sarah went back to her duties. Half an hour later, the button lit up again. Sarah took a deep breath before returning. "Yes? The air conditioning is too strong. I'm freezing here." Sarah went to the panel and adjusted the temperature. "Is that better?" Diane just made a dismissive gesture. Sarah returned. 20 minutes later, the button again. Sarah felt something tighten in her chest, but she kept the professional smile. She went back. "What can I do for you?" "Now it's too hot. Can't you get the temperature right?" Diane's voice had that tone. The tone Sarah knew well from years working with the public. The tone of someone who thinks they're above you, that your work means nothing, that you mean nothing. Sarah adjusted it again, apologized. She sat on the small flight attendant's seat and closed her eyes for 1 second, just 1 second. She took 3 deep breaths, 1 hour and 20 minutes into the flight. Light turbulence. The fasten seatbelt sign turned on. Sarah was organizing the snacks when the plane jolted. It wasn't strong, but it was enough to make the tray she was holding sway. Sarah tried to hold it. She managed to keep everything from falling, almost, but a cup of water slipped. It hit the aisle, rolled all the way to seat 2A. Water splashed onto the armrest of Diane's seat. A few drops hit the laptop keyboard. "Are you kidding me?" Diane stood up. She didn't shout, but her voice was loaded with something heavy. Months of frustration, of contained anger, of everything going wrong in her life and needing someone to blame. Sarah rushed over, tried to clean it. "I'm sorry, it was the turbulence. I don't want your apologies. I want you to do your job properly." Sarah knelt to clean the armrest better. That's when the metal slipped out from under her blouse, hanging from the thin necklace, swinging as she moved. Diane saw it, and something inside her exploded. Maybe seeing that was to her a symbol of everything she rejected, faith, hope, things she couldn't control. Maybe it was simply who she had become. Diane reached out and ripped the metal from Sarah's neck. The chain snapped with a small but definitive crack. The tiny beads scattered across the floor. The metal stayed in Diane's hand. Maybe, if you cared more about your job and less about these ridiculous superstitions, you would be less incompetent. And she threw the metal onto the aisle floor. The small piece of metal hit the ground with a sound that seemed to echo through the whole plane. Sarah froze, completely still, staring at the metal on the floor. That small piece of silver that was everything she still had of Rachel. The last physical thing she could touch and feel connected to her sister, and something inside her broke. It wasn't the metal, it wasn't the chain, it was Sarah. 3 years of held-back pain, 3 years pretending to be fine, 3 years smiling when she wanted to scream, 3 years carrying grief alone because everyone expected her to be over it already. Everything collapsed at once. She bent down slowly. She picked up the metal with both hands as if she were holding something infinitely fragile, pressed it against her chest, and began to cry, right there, in the hallway, in uniform, in the middle of her shift. But she couldn't stop. She didn't want to stop. It was as if someone had finally opened a floodgate that had been shut for years, shut so tightly that Sarah had forgotten it even existed. The sobs came deep, from a place she didn't even know she had been storing away. Diane stood there staring. She expected anger, expected Sarah to yell at her, expected her to call the supervisor, to make a scene, to demand that she be removed from the flight. But she didn't expect this. She didn't expect to see someone completely fall apart. And for the first time in years, Diane felt something beyond the constant anger she carried. Shame. Real, visceral shame that burned in her chest and climbed up her throat. I didn't mean, she started, but her voice failed. Sarah wasn't listening. She was only crying, hugging that metal as if it were the most precious thing in the universe. Another flight attendant appeared, Rebecca, who worked in economy class. She had heard the crying. She came running, saw Sarah on the floor. Saw Diane standing there, understood immediately what had happened. "Come on, Sarah, come with me." Rebecca helped Sarah stand, held her by the shoulders with firmness and tenderness, guided her to the back of the plane, far from the first-class passengers. Diane returned to her seat, sat down slowly, looked at the still-open laptop, at the presentation she had reviewed 1,000 times, at the numbers and charts that were supposed to impress the client. None of it made sense now. She closed the screen, leaned her head back, tried to get back to work. She couldn't. She kept seeing Sarah's face, the crying, the raw pain, tried to convince herself it was just a medal, she's overreacting, people overreact, it wasn't my fault. But the words sounded hollow, even to herself. She knew it wasn't true. She knew exactly what she had done. An hour went by. Diane tried to sleep, tried anything not to think. It didn't work. That was when she started to smell it. Roses. Too strong to ignore, sweet but not cloying, fresh as if someone had just cut flowers and placed them right beside her. Diane looked around. No one was nearby. There were no flowers anywhere, but the smell was there. Impossible to deny. Impossible to ignore. What ridiculous perfume is someone wearing, Diane thought, trying to rationalize. But the smell didn't come from outside. It came from close, very close, as if it were around her specifically. Diane took a deep breath, trying to identify where it was coming from. The scent grew stronger. She closed her eyes, tried to ignore it. She couldn't. The smell of roses stayed there, constant, enveloping. 30 minutes later, the heat began. At first it was subtle, a feeling of discomfort in her chest, as if she were wearing clothes that were far too tight. Diane adjusted her seatbelt, thinking maybe it was too snug. It didn't help. The discomfort grew more intense. The heat increased. It wasn't a fever. It wasn't the plane's air conditioning. It was different, localized, as if someone had placed a hand right there in the center of her chest, exactly where her heart was beating and was pressing. Diane stood up, stumbled her way to the lavatory, locked the door, turned on the faucet, cold water, splashed it on her face. Once, twice, 3 times, looked in the mirror and saw herself. Really saw herself. For the first time in years, a 48-year-old woman stared back. Deep dark circles, wrinkles that hadn't been there 5 years ago, a hard, bitter expression, the face of someone who had forgotten how to truly smile, a woman who once had everything and lost it, who worked non-stop so she wouldn't have to feel, who treated people like objects because it was easier, who had just made another woman collapse in public and cared more about her own presentation than about the pain she had caused. Diane returned to her seat. The plane was beginning its descent. Half an hour remained before they arrived in Chicago. Half an hour until the meeting that was supposedly going to define her future. But Diane couldn't think about the meeting. She closed her eyes, tried not to think, tried not to feel. And then she heard the voice. "Diane." Low, soft, but impossible to ignore, as if someone had whispered right into her ear. Diane opened her eyes, looked around. No one had spoken. First class was silent. The man 3 rows back was still asleep. The other seats were empty or occupied by passengers focused on their own tasks. Diane? Again, clearer now. Diane turned her head toward the aisle, and she saw. A woman was standing there. Diane hadn't seen her arrive, hadn't heard footsteps. The woman was simply there, as if she had always been. She wore something blue, not a simple dress, but a mantle, a deep blue like the sky just before night fully settles. Her hair was dark, long, falling in soft waves. But it was the face that caught all the attention. Beautiful wasn't the right word. Beautiful was insufficient. It was something that transcended physical beauty. It felt like looking at someone and seeing pure love. No judgment, no anger. Only love. Diane tried to speak. Her throat was closed. She tried to move. Her body wouldn't obey. She stayed there, frozen, as the woman approached, slowly, with steps that made no sound on the plane's floor. She stopped right in front of Diane. And she looked. That gaze saw everything, every mistake, every cruel word spoken over the years, every moment she chose control instead of compassion, the divorce and everything that led to it, the loneliness she pretended not to feel, the anger she wore like armor, the emptiness growing inside her each day. All of it was there, exposed, impossible to hide. But there was no condemnation in that gaze. There was something infinitely more devastating: sorrow. The sorrow of a mother watching her child hurt themselves, of someone who knows every flaw, every weakness, every selfish moment, and who, despite all of it, is still there, still waiting, still believing there is something better within that person. Diane felt her knees weaken, not from fear, from something deeper, true remorse, the kind that burns the soul and changes something fundamental. The tears came, silent at first, sliding down her face, then more intense. Diane couldn't look away. She didn't want to look away. For the first time in years, perhaps in her entire life, she was seeing herself through eyes that truly mattered, and what she saw was devastating. But there was something else too. In the woman's eyes, along with the sorrow, there was hope. As if she were saying without words, "I know who you've become, but I also know who you can be. The door is still open. There is still time. I am still waiting for you." The woman didn't speak, but Diane understood everything. And she also felt something she hadn't expected. Forgiveness offered. Not earned, not deserved, simply offered. Freely, unconditionally, waiting only for her to reach out and accept it. The woman smiled, a small, gentle smile, full of a tenderness Diane hadn't known existed. Then she turned, slowly, and vanished. 1 second she was there, solid, real. The next, she was no longer there, as if she had never been, but Diane knew she had been. She knew with a certainty that went beyond logic or reason. She had seen, she had felt. The plane continued its descent. The scent of roses lingered for a few more minutes. Then it faded too. The warmth in her chest began to lessen. But something inside Diane had changed permanently, something fundamental, something she knew would never be the same again. The plane landed smoothly in Chicago. The wheels touched the asphalt with a slight jolt. Passengers began to move, grabbing belongings, preparing to disembark. Diane remained seated. She didn't move when the seatbelt sign turned off. She didn't move when the other passengers began to exit. She just sat there processing, feeling, trying to understand what had just happened. Finally, when first class was empty, she stood up, grabbed her bag, and instead of exiting through the front door, she walked toward the back of the plane. Sarah was there, sitting on the small crew seat. Her eyes were still red, but she wasn't crying anymore. She held the medal carefully. Rebecca was beside her, keeping her company in silence. Diane stopped in the aisle. Sarah looked up, recognized her. Her expression hardened immediately. Rebecca instinctively stepped between them. Protective. Diane raised her hands in a gesture of peace. I just came to apologize." Sarah remained silent, watching, assessing whether it was genuine or just another performance. Diane took a step forward. Her voice came out broken. "For what I did, for what I said, for having ripped away something that was clearly important to you, for being cruel for absolutely no reason, Her voice collapsed completely. Diane took a deep breath. Tried again. "I have no excuse, no justification. It was awful. I was awful. And I'm sorry. Truly sorry." The tears returned. Diane didn't try to hide them. She let them fall. Sarah kept watching. Then, slowly, she nodded. "I accept your apology." Her voice was tired but held no anger, only exhaustion. Diane wanted to say more, wanted to explain, wanted to tell her about the woman in the blue mantle, about the smell of roses, about feeling like she had just experienced the most important encounter of her life. But she couldn't. The words wouldn't come. She only nodded back. "Thank you," she whispered, and left. Diane walked out of the airport straight to a taxi. She gave the hotel address. The driver tried to make conversation. She didn't answer. She just looked out the window watching Chicago go by, the busy streets, the people coming and going, everyone with their own lives, their own problems, their own pains she had never stopped to consider. She arrived at the hotel, checked in mechanically, went up to the room. It was 2:15 in the afternoon. The meeting had been at 2. She had already missed it, already destroyed the 20 million account, already ended her career. And for the first time in years, Diane didn't care. She sat on the edge of the bed, stared at her own hands for a long time, hands that had built a career but destroyed relationships, hands that now trembled with the certainty that everything needed to change. She picked up the phone, stared at the screen for a full 5 minutes, then dialed a number she hadn't called in 2 years. The call rang 3 times. "Hello?" Her mother's voice, surprised, cautious. "Hi, Mom, it's me." A long silence. "Diane? I just wanted to say that I'm sorry for everything, for having stopped calling, for being so harsh in the last conversation we had, for choosing work instead of family so many times, for—" Her voice broke completely. Diane began to cry, really cry. Not the contained, controlled tears she occasionally allowed, but deep, releasing sobs from years she had kept locked away. "For becoming someone you wouldn't recognize, someone I don't recognize." On the other end of the line, her mother began to cry as well. "Oh, my daughter, I have been waiting for this call for so long." They talked for 2 hours, 2 hours that felt like 5 minutes. Diane told her about the divorce, about the job that had consumed her life, about the loneliness she pretended not to feel, about that afternoon's flight and the woman she had seen, about feeling she had been given a chance to begin again. Her mother listened to everything, didn't judge, didn't criticize, just listened, and at the end said, "It's never too late to change, Diane. It's never too late to come home." Before we finish, I want to invite you to join our prayer community for the Virgin Mary, a place of faith and hope where people from all over the world come together to pray and share the graces they've received. If you feel in your heart the desire to be part of this chain of prayer, click below and become a member of the channel today and come pray with us. And you? Do you believe that the Virgin Mary still appears to people? That she still performs miracles in the most unlikely places, at the moments when we need them most? If you made it this far, to the end of Sarah and Diane's story, do one thing for me. Write in the comments blue mantle, the color that changed 2 lives forever. I want to see how many hearts this story truly reached. And every time I read blue mantle in the comments, I will know that one more person believes that miracles from the Virgin Mary still happen. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. Share this video with someone who needs renewed hope today. May the Virgin Mary continue to bless and protect you and your family. Amen.